Old Path in our study through the Old Testament. We are currently in the book of Job, and we're going to tackle the 6th and 7th chapters today. At this point in time, what we have is some of the things that Job said in his opening, and then Eliphaz, the first of the people that are speaking to him and supposed to be there as his counselors, has had quite a number of things to say, and they're kind of indicting things. What we're going to get in these two chapters is Job's reply. And it is going to be kind of a repeat of some of the things that he has already said. And really at this point, he's in a place of just such despair that it would be better that his life were just over. And, before we go into all of this and before we even do much more in the way of any other kind of review, I want to stop for a moment and say what I think should be obvious to each of us, and though we might not have thought of it until this point, but there is so much that is assumed, not only by Job, but also by his counselors, as we'll see next week of his next counselor. The bottom line to it, though, is that a lot of assumptions are made, and those assumptions are based on really kind of a lack of understanding. And I want to make sure that we really understand this as well. What we have in front of us in the Bible itself as a completed book of the Old and New Testament really should prevent us from falling into some of the same traps that they did. And in some ways, you can almost find a way to excuse it to some extent because they don't have the one thing that we do in the completeness of the books that we have, of the 66 books of the Scripture. It would keep a person from kind of coming to some of the same conclusions that they did, is that God does things just because of punitive reasons, or if a person is suffering some kind of hardship, that it must be something that they have done wrong and that they are under the direct punishment of God. Those types of things, we really would never come to an understanding or a belief in those things based on what we have here in Scripture. So the only thing I can assume is that they don't have anything in the way of writing that we would think of as far as the Bible is concerned, because really nothing of from what we can tell of where this would have been placed in the history of man, there wouldn't have been any of the writings. This is I can only conclude prior to Moses. And so when you think of the writings that would have been in place from Moses onward, Moses writes about some history that is prior to him, but it really only picks up with the firsthand account from the things of the Exodus onward. So most would believe, because there's no alluding to the law, there is no mention of anything having to do with the temple or of those kind of sacrifices, that in the absence of all of those kind of things or any other references that would put it any time after Moses, gives just that impression that it's older than that by far. And yet that does not mean that there are not things that he knows, as we'll see in some of the chapters coming up, that are far beyond just it would take actually the writings, some of it of the New Testament, to even fully grasp just how much he really did know that was something that's not revealed until, like I say, the New Testament comes around. And we'll deal with those. The perfect example of that is found in chapter 19. But before we look at the text, I just want to go back at this again and just make sure that we understand. When it comes to coming to some kind of a conclusion and coming to some kind of in our own minds, if we're trying to settle something that is a question in our own minds and in our own thoughts, we better make sure that we have a very good grasp and an understanding of all of what Scripture would teach. Because really it should have been one of these kinds of situations where all of this happens to Job, and then his friends show up, and the first thing would be, these things don't happen to people that are right before God. And Job would have said, I agree, if he believes that, to say, and we get the impression that he does by what we're going to read today, then it should have been that these people all come together and say, well, Job, then if you've said that everything that you could have done that may very well have been a problem as far as God was concerned, and you've confessed those things, then there must be something else at work here. Instead, and this is just human nature, if you're sure of your side of it, you're not really all that open to hear the other side. And so in this, both Job and his counselors will lock in on this. And they will make some assumptions about God and how he does things. And it won't be until God actually has his part in this, and he explains some things, that they're all going to realize just how far out of understanding they really were. So, in case you're kind of coming into this late and you weren't there for the first two chapters, and you want to go back and study those, they're here on the website for the church, for the ministry, I should say, of Old Path Theology, or you can look at the YouTube channel. But either one of them has the studies. But chapters 1 and 2, the bottom line to this, every single bit of this calamity that has fallen upon him is based upon an accusation that Satan makes against God, and he uses Job as the example. People would not love you, and they would not follow you. They would not do anything pertaining to you if you didn't give them everything. And so the only reason it's kind of thrown out there as mankind would never love you, and the only reason that they would follow you and show any kind of fidelity towards you is because you give them things. Now, if you take away everything that you've given them, then they will turn on you and they will curse you to your face. And that's what's been said. Chapter 1, God said to Satan, well, this is something, he didn't say this part, it's just implied. There's only one way that charge against me, and then ultimately anyone who would follow me, is going to have to be proven out. God could say, no, that's not true, and yet anybody would be able to make that accusation going forward. So what God allows Satan to do, you can take those things that belong to him, and Satan goes so far beyond what we would think at that point, he ruins his life as we would reckon it by taking out most of his family, of his possessions, and that still does not get him to the place where he curses God. It's quite the contrary. And even when his wife has the things to say that she does, he basically says, so we're expected to just only take those things that are good and not expect that there may be those times of lean and they're not good things, and we're supposed to reject those. So he has that right place of integrity. The second chapter really kind of is along the same lines. The only reason that they like you, the people, is because you give them favor. And even if you take away their stuff outside, if you don't touch their own body and you don't make them miserable in their health and their well-being as a person, then, of course they're going to continue. But take those things away in addition to all the other things, and it'll be enough for him to curse. So we see that plays out as well. And here, even at this time, if we're looking kind of at both sides of this, and again, we're going to get Job's second time of speaking, but it's because of what he's heard from Eliphaz. Job had said he doesn't understand why the things are taking place, but it's so miserable between what he has lost and that sense of belonging and those things that were important to him, his family, I think above all else by a long shot, and now all these things of his health and the day-to-day misery that he is in, it would just be better that he died. And he's much further down that road by just saying, we should curse the day in which I was born. It just is a way of over the top kind of expressing what kind of deep grief and sorrow and just anguish that this man is in. Unimaginable as far as I'm concerned. So along comes his first counselor, as we've looked at last couple of weeks. And he comes along and basically says, well, these things don't happen on their own. And even if you say that you've not done something wrong, and even if you have, that you've acknowledged it, clearly you haven't, because these things persist. So you can see that there's a real frustration in Job at this point, and there is now a building frustration, as we will definitely see next week, of those people who are there to hear Job's case in this, or hear what he has to say, because they keep coming back to the same conclusion. No matter what you say, Job, you are definitely the problem. Now, the one thing about this too, we do get, for the really kind of the first time, that Job here has bought into some portion of what they've said, and he may have believed this all along, is the cause of his problem is God himself. And he's more in that place of just thinking, maybe he's just not aware of how bad these things are. Maybe he's not paying close enough attention. Maybe he doesn't understand how far it's gone, and yet he still sees that God is the one who afflicts him. And yet at that point, it's almost as though somehow he thinks that he's aloof to it and that God's not paying that close of attention. You get those things from the things that Job says here. And so he's going to take some of the things that his counselor has said here. He's going to also kind of indict him for some things. And as we study through this and look through this chapter, there are those times without really much of a segue to it, he kind of has things that he says to Eliphaz and other things that he addresses more to God, and it almost happens without you noticing it. So we've just got to be careful with those times of transition. We'll point them out as we go along. But we get to chapter 6, and so let's have him turn there. Let's have a word of prayer, and we'll take a look at the text. Father, we thank you so much that we can come to your word, and we learn so much even through this book of Job, as we think of it as being so ancient in its history, and it's before the law, and it's before so much of what we know about in your word. And yet we learn so much about you and how you do the things that you do, the interaction that you have with your creation, learning things about you and how you do the things that you do. And so as we study this life of this man and the misery that he has gone through and the testing that it really produced, we ask, Lord, that we would be very, very quick to listen to everything that we hear, very quick to take things to your word and let your word have the final say rather than our conclusions and our own opinion. So, Lord, be glorified in what we study and in what we take away from it, that we might walk with you in a closer and in a nearer sense than we ever have. We give you all thanks and praise in Jesus' name. All right, so chapter 6 begins like this. So Job answered and he said, now we remember everything that he has already heard as Eliphaz has said the things that he has said. We've already had the chance to study through those things and hear those bits of what is very actually just incorrect counsel. Doesn't seem like there's any malice in it, but again, the problem is if it is off in its foundational belief. God is punishing you for something that you have done, some kind of sinfulness, because these things don't happen on their own. It is a faulty premise that Job is being punished by God because of some wrong that Job has committed. He's not a guilty man in this case. But you can see that Job does kind of join in on this because his point is God is ultimately the reason why this is taking place. So here's what he says in verse 2. Oh, that my grief were fully weighed, and that my calamity laid with it on the scales. For then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. And this is kind of a general statement, but it does kind of address a little bit with Eliphaz. It's, if we were going to put it as I would reckon this, as I understand it in our English, is you don't know the half of what my grief is like. In fact, if it could be weighed out, it's way worse than you could possibly imagine. So as much as Eliphaz or any of his counselors are able to see, his friends are able to see, they don't know the depths of it. They don't know fully what's going on in his mind. And so since they can't fully even begin to understand it, they've never been through these things, which is a very important reminder for us. It's very hard for us to come alongside and offer counsel to somebody who's going through something we've never seen before. And, if you've been at it long enough, more than likely you have seen most of those things and you can kind of understand what the difficulty would be. But so far, none of these guys have ever had to endure anything like this. His whole family, other than his wife, has been wiped out. His material possessions are wiped out. And the man lays in misery every single day and has for some time. And he just despairs of life. You can see it's too much. It's overwhelming him. And yet he doesn't take matters into his own hands to end his own life. He keeps looking to God and saying, why doesn't he just take me out and end my misery? So he says this, if there was able to be weighed, if you could really fully understand the depths of my grief and my sorrow and my trouble, then it would be heavier than the sand of the sea. Therefore my words have been rash. That's why I'm brought to the point of frustration and just making the statements that I make based on what I think is going on here. So, he's led to these conclusions, and it's pretty hard to find fault with this based on what he knows, and it's clear that they only know so much. And so once again, if we put ourselves, and just make this a New Testament kind of a thing, and we watched a person go through all of this horrible, horrible stuff, knowing what we know about God, God doesn't just do this kind of stuff just for no reason, just because he's punitive, for those kind of things. And even now, I'm not aware of people who have gone through these kind of things just because God's trying to get their attention. And again, we live in a different time now, and things from what we study in the Old Testament, especially after the law, there was absolutely God saying, if you will do this, then you can walk in a place of blessing. But if you will not, then there will be those times when it will be unmistakable that you have fallen out of favor with God, and you'll have things like disease, or you'll have famine, or you'll have drought, those kind of things. God would predict it, and he said it before they would happen. In this case, none of this stuff was known to Job. It just happens in an instant, and it's dramatic. So again, since we have all of that as our background, it's pretty hard for us to come and take a look at a person especially somebody who loves and honors God, to go through an incredible amount of trouble and calamity and just destitution, and come away with it other than to say, I don't understand why God would allow something like this, but do I see him as the cause of it? When there are plenty of other people who may have, every other reason and give God reason to do the things that they think are being done to a person who walks righteously, and yet they don't. So, it's just, again, one of those kind of things that we can say there's no blanket way to answer those kind of things. And again, I've known plenty of people in my time that there's no hidden sin in them. We've talked about those kind of things, and they've actually said the same kind of things as Job, where it's like, I don't understand why these things are happening. My life is right before the Lord. And even if I've done something that I'm not aware of, I've acknowledged those things. I've asked him for his forgiveness and cleansing of those things. I don't understand why these problems persist, but it's not for lack of coming before him and seeking remedy. Now, why God allows people to go through things and why things happen as they do, the best counsel that we can ever give, if it's not an obvious answer, is to say, I genuinely can't understand why. I don't know why God does, but he doesn't owe me an answer either, so it's not for us to contend that way. It's better that we just look at it and say, sometimes God lets these things happen unbeknownst, no way of reasoning, no way that we can have of understanding why, but they happen. And we need to just work with it from that point of view, rather than throwing out all these things, well, it's something that you must have done. As there are those people in those particular parts of the church that would say, well, if there's a lack of anything, or if you're sick or whatever else, it's because of some unconfessed sin that you have, and the problem's got to be with you. We still have those people with us today, obviously, as these people here. These things don't happen on their own. Well, you don't even know what God's doing behind the scenes, and you don't know what his end game is in those things. But God doesn't do things just because of some perverse sense of messing with people, and he doesn't do things because it's just a punitive act on his part. People do that. God does not do that. So if we don't have a clear answer as to why things are the way that they are, let's not assume to understand the motivation behind it, and let's not assume that we know better than the person who is being honest and saying, I've done nothing wrong. So at this point, with all of what he has said, and all of that's been said so far and will be said, if it was something that Job had done, he again asserts his integrity. I've done everything that I can to try to make this go away, and yet it persists. Now, here's the first place where we can see that, well, not the first place, but you can see it's kind of more evolving, if you will. We're seeing more elements to it. Clearly, at this point, he has already said that God must be allowing these things, and it would be better that he had just taken me now. He's going further than that. Look at what he says in verse 4. For the arrows of the Almighty are within me. My spirit drinks in their poison, and the terrors of God are arrayed against me. So if there's any question in this as to whether or not Job thinks that God is somehow the cause of these things, there it pretty much gives that understanding that at the very, very minimum, though he doesn't say anything that even gives this implication, it would be that God is allowing these things. It doesn't even seem like that, because he seems, as he says here, it seems like a direct thing from God, the arrows of the Almighty, and his soul is being affected by the venom that he feels, or the poison that is found in the tips of those arrows. So it's not just his physical thing, but it's his soul. It's the entirety of his being, not just the discomfort of all of the physical things, but all of the things that would make a heart sick, the damage that's been done, the loss of life that has happened to him, all of those things combined. He just sees it. Only one place or only one person could be responsible for these things, though he can't give an explanation as to why. And so he goes on in verse 5 and he says, does a wild donkey bray when it has grass, or does the ox low over its fodder? His way of saying, all of the problems that I have now have caused me to say the things that I have said. However they may be taken, or however they may be understood, when things were going the way that they were, I never had these things enter into my mind. It would be better that I had not been born. Why does God not just take me out now? Curse the day on which I was born. When everything was going well, he never even thought in those terms. So again, this is him reasoning out loud, and even for him, his counselors to hear, look, I didn't make any noise about any of this stuff when everything was going as it is. But how can you not come to some kind of conclusions when all of this has happened to you and there's no explanation for it? You start to just, in your own frustration and anguish, ask and just throw out hypotheticals. Is it possible? Why is this the case? So he ends up saying, can flavorless food be eaten without salt? Or is there any taste in the white of an egg? My soul refuses to touch them, and they are loathsome food to me. So that's, if he's likening this to the life of things, when there is an understanding of just the day-to-day of things, and it's not all just one-sided horrible calamity and all the rest, but you have kind of the good and bad. It's like, well, yeah, there's the whites of eggs, but you can always add salt to it. You can do something to flavor it, and there is something that will counter or that will balance the good with the bad. And so his point is, there is no good in this. I can't find any silver lining, as the word, or as the kind of the euphemism goes. There's nothing about this in which I can find any piece of comfort. All of it is loathsome and tasteless, and there's no point to it. It's all bad. And so again, I look at this and I just think, yeah, Job, but just hang in there because it's going to get better. Well, I've read the rest of the book, so I know how it ends. But in the thick of it, and how many times have we ourselves even been in that place where everything just is not going the way that it's supposed to be? And you come to conclusions that in hindsight, once you're on the other side of it, it's like, man, why would I think such a thing? We start to kind of impute towards God, what is his motivation? Why would he be doing these things? Why is he allowing this? Is he not paying attention? You get really frustrated, and especially as you're a younger believer, that's much more possible. The older that you get, you understand, having been through a few of these things, God does not do things with impunity. God loves me to the point where I know that he has sent his son to die in my place. How could I ever look at him and say he does things spitefully just for some reason, when I just think, I didn't deserve it, but he sent his son to die in my place? I mean, to try to somehow think that those two things coexist is just to not really be honest about who God is by his nature. So again, it's hard to hold Job to that same standard as what we should know. But yet still, when trouble comes into the life of the believer, it's really funny. I shouldn't say funny. It's interesting to watch how quickly we can forget all the things that we think we know about the love and the grace and the mercy and the kindness of God because of circumstances. Well, in this case, basically the same thing. So Job asks these things. They're more rhetorical, but he asks, can flavorless food be eaten without salt? Or what is their taste in the white of an egg? Or is there any taste in the white of an egg? So he says in verse 8, oh, that I might have my request, that God would grant me the thing that I long for. Going back to what he has already said, it would be better that I just died and have this all over with. The grief is overwhelming. I can't, it's like that point of just saying, I can't deal with this anymore. So he says, that it would please God to crush me, and that he would loose his hand and cut me off. Finish the job. Wouldn't it be better if I just died? Because how much worse can it get? Everything's been taken from me, and now I'm in the place of just such anguish and pain and discomfort and just, again, unimaginable. He says more about it again. But what's left? Why exist anymore? Why should I go through this? He doesn't seem to think that there's an end in sight to this, that it's only for a while, that it's only going to be for this time. It's like, why does God not just finish the job? So he says this in verse 10, then I would still have comfort, though in anguish I would exult. So I would be able to die and be beyond this, and though I'm in this place of anguish, I would rejoice in it. So this point of, I'm in such a horrible, horrible place, but I would be able to leap for joy, if you will. He says, but he will not spare, for I have not concealed the words of the Holy One. His point is, I've been faithful and I believe what I believe. I've never wavered in what my belief is, but it would be better for me to be gone. So I know that there are those times, potentially for some of you who are here listening, and maybe you're going through something like right here, right now. And you just think, what's the use? I've met so many people who have said that precise thing. It would just be better that I would be gone. And frankly, you're putting way too much emphasis on the things of the here and now and the difficulties that are there, and not seeing what could God still be doing through your life if you get out of your own head and start to think, well, if he has breath in me, there's got to be a reason why I am still here. And if I am still here, what is my one reason for existing here in this earth? And that is to make him known, to walk rightly before him, and to be used by him to make him known to others. That's what, above everything else, that's what our task is here. So, again, it looks different from our perspective because we have a much bigger, broader view of things. We look back at 2,000 years at what Jesus has accomplished and what is to come, where everything to the people who are here is before anything was written that we know of as the record that we call the Bible, which really informs so much about what we know and what we understand. So with that, it says now, verse 11, so what strength do I have that I should hope? And what is my end that I should prolong my life? So not knowing what's coming, why not just get it over with? Why not just be done with it? But in all of this, notice he never takes it into his own hands, like, I'm just going to go jump off the bridge, that kind of a thing. Verse 12, is my strength the strength of stones, or my flesh as bronze? Is my help not within me? And is success driven from me? All of these hypothetical things, like I don't have control over these things. And how am I supposed to endure when I'm just a mortal person and these things are so far beyond what mortals could or should be able to endure and withstand? He's at that point of like, there's really nothing left. I can't endure this inevitably. It's just got to end. So again, I can't understand. I can't even begin to grasp the amount of hurt and heartache that there would be in a person like this by this point. Your heart just kind of breaks as you listen to this because it's just so sad. So verse 14. Now to him who is afflicted, kindness should be shown by his friend, even though he forsakes the fear of the Almighty. So there are a few of these things in the phrasing of this. It's a little bit hard to fully nail down. The first part of it's very obvious. So it is when you came here, looking at Eliphaz, when you came here to give me comfort, comfort is the last thing that you've given. Don't you even have fear of God? A person should be one who could come alongside and look to offer comfort rather than just to make accusation after accusation. So far, Eliphaz has said, hey, I don't care what it is that you've said. All I know is this. Nobody goes through what you're going through unless they're the cause of it. And that's about the summary of the things that he has said. Though he's thrown it in and made it a little bit more personal, look, when you look at the beginning of what Eliphaz says, he says to Job, hey, man, I don't think he said, hey, man, but you get my point. I'm paraphrasing. How many times have you had to counsel somebody through something like what you're going through right here, and I'm offering you the same counsel, but you're going to reject it? So he makes a number of assumptions. Job's a hypocrite. Job has obviously done something that he has counseled other people over, but he's in the same place, and yet he still wants to plead his innocence. Just, you can see that. So verse 15 says this, my brothers have dealt deceitfully like a brook, like the streams of brooks that pass away, which are dark because of the ice, and into which the snow vanishes. And when it is warm, they cease to flow. When it is hot, they vanish from their place, and the paths of their way turn aside. They go nowhere, and they perish. And so he uses this picture that they would all understand. Those times when there is plenty of water in rivers, and then they start to splinter out into different places and they go different courses. But when there's an ample water supply, usually because of the higher elevations and snow and everything else, and the rivers are raging, but as the summer wears on, or as it gets later in the year, the source of where that water comes from begins to dry up, and those streams begin to dry up, and even the little fingers become nothing. We can watch it. Any of us, no matter where you live just about, is able to know that the changes of the seasons, the rainy season and the snowpack and everything, will give life to the streams in the springtime. There's always ample water until it begins to dry up. So he uses that same thing. That whole thing about you guys you put yourself in this place of being this helpfulness and all the rest, but just like everything, you ultimately end up disappointing. And he uses a real world example of it, where he says, the caravans of Tema, they look. The travelers of Sheba, they hope for them, but then they are disappointed because they were confident. They came there and they were confused. That point is, these travelers, as they came to this place looking for water and looking for comfort, looking for something to take care of their thirst and their need, once they get there, assuming that something's going to be there, there really isn't anything. So again, Job could look at these people as very much like the rivers. These are people who are coming to my aid. They're going to be helpful. And when it turns out, and when I hear everything that they have to say, there's really nothing of any value. Everything's dried up and they are of no use to me. So again, a caravan coming to what is a river, but if there's no water in it, what's their use? There's nothing helpful. So This is the imagery that's there in front of Job, and he says these things. Now, in verse 21, he says this, "For now you are nothing, you see terror, and you are afraid." So in this, once again, this is one of those passages that gives the impression that as they see these things happening to Job, that they begin to say or think, and this is what I believe, this is one of the places you can take from this, they're so forceful in their going back to Job again and again and again. It's got to be you, it's got to be you, it's got to be you. Because if a man like Job, with everything that they know about him, and the favor that he had and the what he was, and how he walked in that place of integrity, and that he was just this upright man who had everything that a man could want, that when he was like that, then everything was just fine. Everybody got along, and they're friends, and they have, they're in a very elite group of people. And now that everything has fallen apart, they're starting to point the finger at him, and then he basically says to them, yeah, but if what I'm saying of my innocence and yet my trouble, now you see it in me and what's happened, and you're fearful. Well, why would they be fearful? Well, the same thing could happen to them. And not because they had done something wrong, but because life sometimes comes and things happen to us that we don't have an explanation for them. Again, there is an explanation in this. They just have no clue what has precipitated this whole thing. Why did it all start? What's the genesis of it? Why did it all happen? We know it because we have the book in front of us. These guys are trying to figure it out real time. So, as verse 22 says, did I ever say, bring me something, or bring something to me? Or did I offer a bribe from me, for me from your wealth? Or did I deliver me rather from the enemy at hand? Or redeem me from the hand of the oppressor? So he says, did I reach out to you guys, and was I asking anything of you? The only thing he would have asked of them, if that was the case, they had heard about it and they came. But if he had sent to them, it wasn't to get something from them. It wasn't for some kind of relief. But if they were to come, even at his behest, it wouldn't be because he wanted anything to be restored to him. If they were to come at his behest, it would be, sit with me for a while. Spend some time with me. Just be my comfort. Pray for me. Do whatever you want to. But it's not here as you could give me counsel and try to tell me all the places where I'm wrong. But he says this, okay, since you've got it all figured out, notice he doesn't even look at what's been said to him thus far as being on par with what he would want from them. Because again, it's been one accusation after another. It's not a matter of comfort. It's a matter of accusation. So he says this, now teach me and I will hold my tongue. Cause me to understand wherein I have erred. How forceful are right words. But what does your arguing prove? Do you intend to rebuke my words and the speeches of a desperate one, which are as the wind? So his point is, if you really think that you've got this all figured out, then show me where my error is rather than generalized accusation. Show me the actual error. What have I actually done wrong? And so this is what he's looking for. Even if there is some kind of an answer that they can offer, they have not done so far, and we're going to see that they're not. What we're really in store here for the next bunch of chapters, it's going to go back and forth with him speaking his part, they speaking their part, and it just doesn't seem to really go very far. So he says in verse 27, yes, yes, you overwhelm the fatherless and you undermine your friend. Now look, therefore be pleased to look at me, for I will never lie to your face. So this is him once again. This is him saying, I will tell you straight out. If you got things that you want to ask, ask. Rather than make generalization, rather than make accusations, just ask. I won't lie to you. I haven't lied to you thus far. So he says, yield now, let there be no injustice. Yes, concede, my righteousness still stands. Is there injustice in my tongue? Cannot my taste discern the unsavory? Don't you understand that I know where these things are coming from? But again, it's at this point where he just says, why will you not understand what I am saying to you? And why will you not believe me to be true when I say that I am innocent of these kind of things? I wouldn't lie to you about this. Again, what does he have to lose at this point? Or why carry on the charade if he really has done something so egregious? What's to lose? He has nothing left. So if this was something that Job had done, it would be easy for him to just say, yeah, I've done everything that you guys accuse me of, and then some, and this is why all of this has happened. Instead, this is said by a man who goes, I just have no clue. And you're not helping by making the accusations. Again, show me my error. What have I done wrong that you are so sure that I have done? Instead, he throws it the other way and says, so my integrity means nothing to you? I've told you I have done nothing wrong. I wouldn't lie to your face. So it's really a challenge that's thrown back to them. So he continues on in chapter 7. Is there not a time of hard service for man on the earth? Are not his days also like the days of a hired man, like the servant who earnestly desires the shade, and like a hired man who eagerly waits for his wages? So I have allotted months of futility. I have been allotted months of futility, and wearisome nights have been appointed. When I lie down, I say, when shall I arise? And when will the night be ended? For I have had my fill of tossing until dawn. So again, the point is, with every kind of difficulty, whether it's the toil of work or whether it's being stuck in the sun and just the weariness that comes from it, when will that end come? Is there not always a desire to get to the end of a particular thing? Or what's even worse, we think of laying down in bed as being a matter of rest, and yet here he says, the rest is just as bad because I'm wondering when's the day going to come, because he's just tossing and turning and can't sleep. These are just, again, matters of just seemingly so futile. So this is Job's whole existence. It's not just the loss. It's not just the sickness that he has and all of the disease that's gripping his body. It's the why, and how long will it take, and when is there going to be an end to these things? So again, I understand his frustration in some part. It would be so horrible to be going through all of these things and not have the slightest understanding as to why they're taking place and why the length of time. Why was it not shortened up? But again, at the same time, I look back at this and go, it is a helpful thing for anyone who is going through all kinds of difficulties and troubles and the rest of it in this life here and now, maybe even some of you who are listening to this, to be able to go to a book like Job and just go, I'm not the first person that this has happened to. And so what happens when a person is faced with really difficult, grievous things? And so here you have an explanation, but you have so much more than that, is that sometimes what we think may be the case is really so far away from what is actually true, we might not want to start down that road of making assumptions. More importantly, what we would want to say is can we walk in the place of integrity and say, God, you owe me nothing, and yet you've given me everything when it pertains to eternal life. When will this be over? I don't know. Help me to be patient in the meantime, and help me to learn what you would show me through the midst of it. Those are the kinds of things that we ought to be asking when we go through these kinds of things. But again, here's one thing I know for sure, and I think I've said it a number of times already. This we know because we have much more hindsight than what Job could have possibly understood. The day will never come when we leave this life going to God and then telling him that somehow because of what we endured here on this earth, in this life, that somehow he treated us unjustly. The idea that we could look him in the eye and see him as the Savior who has saved us would show that we've gotten much more than we ever deserved. So the idea to be saying we have been treated unjustly, it's absurd on its face. So what we read in verse 5, my flesh is caked with worms and dust. My skin is cracked and it breaks out afresh. So even the oozing of things just gives that impression, these boils and all the stuff that was on him. He's just caked on with worms or things that are trying to feast on him, and he's just caked in dust. So going from a place of a man who had material things like no one else in that part of the world, from what we read in the very beginning of this book, now he's reduced to being like a person who just lives in the filth of things. And not only does he just live in filth, he's also afflicted with all kinds of just horrible things, grievous sores. Now worms are part of the equation. It's just hard for us to wrap our minds around how bad this thing is. So he says this, my days are swifter than a weaver's shuttle, and they are spent without hope. So the days of his life is not just that particular day, but looking back at the entirety of his life, it's just gone by so quickly. And a weaver's, what does he call it? A weaver's, oh my goodness, a weaver's shuttle. if we're thinking about the old way that they used to make fabrics and things, if you remember, you've probably seen the pictures of it, but there would be a little piece, looked like something about the size of a bar of soap, and it would usually have a little bit of a pointed end so it didn't get hung up on things. But they would throw it from one side to the other, and then they would push through on the loom, and it would make fabrics. So it's like that. It goes very, very fast. If you watch a person who's proficient at this, using these old looms, they would throw it from one side to the other, press it forward, throw it from one side to the other. That's a visual that he's using. Very difficult. You almost have to go on YouTube now to see somebody actually using these old methods. But to the people who are reading this, they understand how quickly somebody proficient at it can weave out things by throwing that shuttle back and forth. So he says, remember that my life is just a breath, and my eye will never again see good. The eye of him who sees me will see me no more. While your eyes are upon me, I shall no longer be. Interestingly enough, when you see here in verse 7 and 8, it's like this will all be over. Just as it seems like it's going by so fast for me, it will be over before anyone else knows it. They'll start looking for me, and yet I'm going to be hidden from their eyes. As the cloud disappears and vanishes away, so he who goes down to the grave does so, and not then comes up. He shall never return to his house, and nor shall his place know him anymore. Again, once life is over, it's over. And so again, you see him getting to that place of the futility of things. What's the use? There's just the hurt and the despair and the brokenness and everything that you would expect. It's just, again, it's such a troublesome thing for him as you see it here. So he says in verse 11, therefore I will not restrain my mouth. I will not speak, or I will rather speak in the anguish of my spirit, and I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. And before we go on to the next, his whole point is, you're wanting me to confess something that I cannot confess to. The only thing that I can do is actually, cry out and say, everything that has taken place has no justification as he sees it. How am I supposed to remain silent when there's just no reason for these things to take place? And yes, he does look that it is God who is causing these things, though he has no explanation as to why. So to him, it would have to look somewhat punitive, but he's still looking at it in a different way than his people that are giving him counsel. So again, let's reset this and make sure we understand it. Nobody is disputing all of the horrible things that have happened to him. It's obvious. It's there for everyone to see. His counselors all have one conclusion. Since these things do not happen on their own, you must have done something rather that has raised the ire of God against you. And if you would just acknowledge those things and put those things out, then you could get this straightened out. Where Job has his part in this, he says, well, there's no question that these calamities have befallen me. And at this point, he says, it's God who has shot the arrows and they poisoned my soul. So he's not questioning where they're coming from. And yet he's wrong in that assumption. And so as a result of that, it's just better that I die. There's nothing that I could do. And he has that rebuke for his counselors. I've told you I've done nothing wrong, but you refuse to listen to me. You question my integrity by not believing that I'm telling you that I stand before you rightly, and anything that I may have done, I've acknowledged it before God. So, though he is the reason for these things happening to me, it's not because of something that I have done, it's for some unknown reason. That's closer to the truth than what the guys have been telling him, and yet it still misses this understanding. God didn't just wake up one morning, as we would understand it, and just think, I'm going to do some horrible things to Job for no good reason. It's all because an accusation was made against a righteous man and the reasons for his walking with God, and there was only one way that would be proved out, and it would be in this man's life. So again, even in all of this, he does not curse God. He may not understand the motivations. He makes a number of assumptions, but never does he say God is the creator of evil and do all the things that Satan said. He's not going to curse God for his situation. He's just better saying it would be better that I was just gone. So I can understand a little bit of that frustration. So anyway, not because I've endured it, but just reading this, you can say, based on what he knows, it's pretty hard to come to other conclusions. So he says this in verse 11, am I a sea or a sea serpent that you have set guard over me? And so his point is, So what do I represent to you? Somebody that needs to be hemmed in and guarded? Are you afraid that I'm going to do something else differently? Do you think that you need to stand and lord over me these things? So, verse 13 rather. When I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and you terrify me with visions. Now, this would seem as though he's more turning his direction towards God, or his thoughts towards him, when he keeps just saying, if he makes this complaint towards God, if let's just read it the way he puts it. Really, verse 11. From verse 11 on, let me just go back a little bit. I'm rushing too much where I really shouldn't. At verse 11, where he starts to say this looks more like his address is he's speaking then to God, not to Eliphaz or them. I won't restrain my mouth. I can't not say the things that I am saying. I will speak in the anguish of my spirit, and I will complain in the bitterness of my soul. His complaint would not be towards his counselors, but really his complaint at this point would be towards God. So it's, again, am I a sea or a sea monster that you have set a guard over me? Is there some reason that I have given to you that you are going to just lock me into these things when it doesn't happen to everyone else? It's, again, he's trying to come to a grips with this. And it does become kind of an indirect accusation, and yet it's still not a cursing of God. That's the important part. So he says, when I say my bed will comfort me, my couch will ease my complaint, then you scare me with dreams and you terrify me with visions, so that my soul chooses strangling and death rather than my body. So there's a question about this, the dreams that he has sent. Is he given these dreams as something that is completely separate, or is he making alluding back to what Eliphaz had said he saw in a vision, but he shared that vision with Job, and then Job is supposed to take what he hears from it and make the application? So he's crying out to God, I find my place in a place of anguish. I look for some kind of comfort, and yet I am instead given dreams. And the things that I'm dreaming, they terrify me. So again, if it's just based on the dream or the vision that was given to Eliphaz, then look at what Eliphaz had to say. In fact, let's go back and look at it because it's pretty important. Here's what it says in verse 17. Here was what the summation of this spirit that he saw in this dream said to him. Can a mortal man be more righteous than God? Can a man be more pure than his maker? And if he puts no trust in his servants, and if he charges his angels with error, how much more those who dwell in houses of clay? So that whole thing is, that would be terrifying to a person. Have I indicted God and the things that he does? Can I say somehow that I'm holier than he is, and that I'm more righteous than my creator? And so the counsel, if that's the case, through this vision that was given through Eliphaz then to Job, then Job is in a place, here I'm trying to figure out what this is, and the only thing that I've heard that seems like a communication from God, if we believe that that's what he's referring to, well, the only thing that he's heard is, can a man be more moral than God? Is he more righteous than his creator? That's terrifying, that if you believe that God has made that assessment of you, where do you go from there? And so you can just see the bitterness of this. So he says, so this is what his soul would rather have. I'd rather die quickly, strangling, being hung, if you will, deprived of oxygen, than this slow death that I am currently in. I'm just terrified of all of this. So he says, and death rather than living or being in my body. He says, I loathe my life. I would not live forever. Let me alone, for my days are but a breath. Let's just end this now. So again, this address is towards the Lord. So he says this. Now, what is man that you should exalt him? So still looking towards God at this point. David says a very similar thing in Psalm 8, I believe it is, that who is man that you're mindful of him, or the sons of men that you visit them? So you've made him a little lower than the angels, but you've crowned him with glory. David has that whole same thing as, who are we that you take notice of us? So to David, I can see him saying that, because even to us, it's easy in these days and age, in this day and age, we can look back and say, who are we that God even pays attention to us, even though we know that God so loved his creation that he was willing to send his son to die for the sin of mankind. That is profound and beautiful and incredible to try to behold and to try to understand. And yet it's all that we know. It's our reality. It's what we understand. So he says this, verse 18. But let's just read 17 again. What is man that you should exalt him, that you should set your heart on him, that you should visit him every morning and test him every moment? How long? How long will you not look away from me and let me alone till I swallow my saliva, till the end of my life, till it's over with? Just will you just look away and let me die? That's kind of it's the theme that's run through all of his statements. He's really at the place where, with everything that has taken place and the misery that has it doesn't have any signs of letting up, how about if God, you just let me die and look the other way and let this be done? So he says, verse 20, have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target so that I am a burden to myself? That's a pretty amazing thing, because again, his point is, if it's something that I've done, where is it? Where is it? Reveal it to me. Help me to see, because you are the watcher of men. It's not as though it's hidden from you. And yet he'll say some other things right after this that would seem somewhat contradictory, but it's really not. We'll look at it here in just a moment. But again, this is like one of the first times that you'll see in his address, but he will say it a number of other times, and he has alluded to it in the last chapter. What is it that I have possibly done that I have not already acknowledged before God? And in the previous chapter, he says, how come you guys won't believe me in this? I've already said I am not guilty of the things that you say that I am. Now he takes this plea towards God. Have I sinned? It's a question that he's already asked that question in numerous times before. And he's the kind of guy, as we see in the first chapters, he would offer every time that his kids would get together in case they had sinned. So he's concerned enough about his kids, clearly he would have as well. So he asks of God, have I sinned? What have I done to you, O watcher of men? Why have you set me as your target so that I am a burden to myself? And so why is it costing me personally? Because you have made me this focus. What have I done that has drawn your attention to the point where it seems like I'm the focus of you doing something to me in the way of punishment? What have I done? What sin have I committed? A person that would ask that question is also concerned with, let me know what the remedy is so that I can seek that out. Of course, he would see that as the way of putting an end to all of this misery. If not for God just allowing him to die, well, at least then show me what my error is so that I can make it right and find a way to get past this. So he says in verse 21, why then do you not pardon my transgressions? So again, he's bought into that whole idea. It must be something that I have done if there's a transgression. But at this point, he's already made the admission, I've done nothing that I know of that's wrong, and he's already confessed those things. So once again, he asks this, why do you not pardon my transgression? He's already asked for it. He's made whatever restitution he feels he needs to. We're not given those details, but he has asked, why are you not pardoning the things that I have done? So that means he has acknowledged them. He recognizes that it is God who is able to answer this. And his whole point is, I know what I'm being accused of by these guys. I know what my circumstances are, but what is my transgression, and why is it that have I even by petitioning, why has it not been granted to me? So he says, then why do you not pardon my transgression and take away my iniquity? For now I will lie down in the dust, and you will seek me diligently, but I will no longer be. And that whole point is that I'm just, by the time that remedy may come to me, I'll already have died from this point. So what he sees is that the trajectory of things, it's going to lead to an end, but because they've gone on so long, and that God has not gotten around to remedy and forgiving transgressions, his point is, I'm going to die before there is a remedy to this, before anything will be given in the way of a pardon of those transgressions. So again, it has to be understood how much of this is said out of frustration and out of anguish and hurt and trouble, that it's all got to be there and it's all got to be present. And yet at the same time, you just want to go, boy, I don't want to get in that place of ever being cynical like that. If whatever happens with my life and all the rest, I don't want to look at God as my oppressor. And yet at this point, that's what he looks at him as. And again, I'm thankful that the scripture never really leaves that as an open option to me. So no matter what would happen to me, I would never want to look at God as my oppressor, especially if I'm in a place like this where Job would be able to say, I've asked for pardon. If there's a transgression, I've acknowledged it, and yet nothing seems to change in this. So, we're supposed to be in that place at all times. God, I acknowledge the things that I have done. I realize how it hurts my fellowship with you, and that you want to hear these things sought for forgiveness and for restoration, because sin hurts my fellowship with God. It's just something that needs to be acknowledged, and it needs to be dealt with really as a day by day kind of a thing. When Jesus taught in the prayer is that give us this day our daily bread and forgive us our trespasses, yeah, that's an everyday kind of a thing. It's our dependence on the Lord to acknowledge the things that may be displeasing to him, that he would make them right because he would offer to us, or he would give to us forgiveness as we request it, and that we could just walk in a place of integrity. So again, Job's in that place. Is he a man of integrity? Yeah, absolutely. And have his circumstances, based on what he understands of things, have they caused him to think, for some reason, God has put me in the crosshairs, and I am the focus of all of his wrath here, though I don't understand it. I've asked for a pardon of my transgressions, whatever they may be, and yet I still have my problems and they still persist. So he's buying into some extent of what theirs is. His counselors don't believe that he has acknowledged his sin. They just believe he's paying lip service and not being honest about it. So you can see why they would be at such an impasse if both sides were of that opinion. There's no way to really reconcile those two things, because they're coming from a totally different view. Job would say, my problems, my troubles come because God is doing this for some unknown reason. And if it was something that I have done, I've already acknowledged it, but there's no pardon for my transgression, whatever it may have been. His counselors would say, yeah, God definitely has done these things to you. And yet, even though you claim you're innocent, clearly you must not be, because your problems persist. So there's no way to reconcile those two groups. There's no way to reconcile those views. It really will take God at the end of this to say, you are all wrong. Here's what was going on. And so we'll get there eventually. It's still a lot of chapters to go, but we'll pick up at chapter 8 for the second of his counselors, and you'll see he picks up right where Eliphaz left off. Everything that Job has said seems to have fallen on deaf ears. They're all going to be singing from the same hymnal, as the old saying goes. So we'll pick up at chapter 8 next week. And again, we should be able to pick this up at a couple of chapters, maybe even more during some of them, because again, it's going to almost become to the point of being redundant. So we'll get to all of those as we go through it. We'll progress through the book, and again, just stick with it if it seems like it's getting tedious and repetitive, because there are some really amazing things that are still coming up even before God says what he's going to say in this. So we'll pick up at chapter 8 next week, and feel free to go ahead and read ahead. And if you have any questions, contact me through the ministry email at oldpaththeology.net, and there is an email button there. You can send me any questions that you have covering this, or really any other questions that you might have. So look forward to picking this up with you next week.